Hello, everyone, and welcome to another session of Globe Summit. My name is Diddy Coley, and I'm a business reporter here at the Globe. Today's session is going to focus on Gen Z mental health and technology's impact. We all know that poor mental health is certainly a challenge for young people and for all people, especially after the pandemic. So these three folks are going to talk a little bit about how mental health and technology aligns for young people. So we're going to touch on the benefits when it comes to access with mental health care, but also the big scary drawbacks that we hear about all the time. We have a couple of great people here today. In the middle, we have Dr. Julia Lee. She's a clinical psychologist and director of technology and mental health at the Harvard Alumni for Mental Health. Then we have on the right, Michael London. He is the CEO of YouWill, a Natick-based ed tech company that helps provide mental health care at college campuses. And on the left, we have Dr. Michael Rich, the founder and director of the Digital Wellness Lab at Boston Children's Hospital. So we only have 35 minutes, so I guess we should dive right into it. Let's start with the big picture question. So this generation, if we're saying Generation Z, is a really large age group with various different stages of development. We're talking about kids as young as 12 and as old as 27. So in your experience with children, college students, and full-fledged adults, how do technology and mental health intersect? And let's do a little bit of both, the good things and the bad things.
I'll start. Okay. Well, these are my peeps, as they say. The 12 to 27-year-olds are the kids that I see, and I think first of all, they're doing better than everybody's panicking about. But I will say that not only were issues going on with the way young people were using the screens in their lives before the pandemic, but on top of that, particularly for this age group, who are biologically programmed to get away from their parents and get with their peers, and we lock them in a box with their parents for at least a year, sometimes up to 3, right? And so what we're really seeing is a huge hit to their mental health, but also to their development, because it got stalled. They couldn't get away from their parents, and that led to a lot of anger and conflict within the homes. Their screen time went up. Parents were freaked about the screen time. They yelled at the kids while their screen time was going up. It got to be really tough during the lockdown. But what we're now seeing is really the long tail of the mental health issue that was accelerated and amplified by the lockdown, but was not new before it. And ultimately, the big fear is technology is doing something to us or doing something to the kids. The reality is that the technology itself is neutral. It's what the kids are doing with it. And we are not using it thoughtfully and wisely. Unfortunately, the kids are using social media the way companies do to market themselves to the world, to show all the best things in their life, the great vacation they went on, their new outfit, their hot boyfriend. And then when people come to it, often with a certain amount of anxiety, social anxiety, because they want to connect with people, it looks like everyone else is happier, more successful than they are, because they know their inner fears, their inner weaknesses, their limitations, and they say, it's, as they say, compare and despair. So I think that we've got a lot of work to do, but it's really around how we relate to these tools. And they are indeed that. They are power tools. They are not toys. They're not treats to be given out for straight A's or taken away for punching their sister. These are very powerful devices, a million times more powerful than the computer that landed Apollo 11 on the moon. And they're in kids' pockets. And 99.9% of what's on them is distraction, not help.
That's a really fair point. I'm curious, are you seeing the same among college students in the age group that you work with?
Thank you. So when I think about Gen Z and technology and mental health, I can't help but think about the life stages that people are in. And, I think of middle school, high school, college, and potentially early career, all within this one group that we're talking about.
Yeah.
I think the commonality among this one group is that everyone grew up with tech. Right? So I can say, 53 years old, sorry, I'm a little embarrassed. I did not truly grow up with tech in the way that they did. They all had phones in high school. So they're in a world, in my opinion, where they are predisposed in a way that a lot of us can't fully understand and appreciate. In terms of as far as the benefits versus the negativity associated with it, I think the benefits are far greater because of all the many things that people are able to do with technology, and I know we're going to talk about later on. I think one of the other benefits of technology, even though it's really easy for me to say, by the way, I have kids and I'm not very good at this, but they can choose not to use technology in the ways that aren't beneficial to them. And I think that that's something that parents have to do better, especially me. And I know that there are many instances where people don't do that well and things aren't perfect. But generally, technology is positive, and we have a group here that can maximize the potential of technology to benefit their mental health, in my opinion.
That's a really great point in the sense that this is a generation where even if you're 27, you grew up with an iPhone in your hand, likely at some point, or someone that you knew did. And I'm curious, like Dr. Lee, as they transition into the workplace, as my generation transitions into the workplace, how that also affects them from an employment standpoint and from how your mental health is doing when you have a boss standpoint.
Thank you for that question, and I appreciate the fact that we're already talking about diversity within this group in terms of developmental stages and life stages. I think it's really important for us to also acknowledge that this is an incredibly diverse, ethnically diverse generation. In fact, close to 50% of Gen Z identify as racial minorities, and they are also the most educated generation of our time. Close to 60% will be enrolling or have finished college. So you put those diversity and different identities together, we have an incredible diversity. Having said that, I think the work life, the college or high school to work transition have really shifted in the last several years. With COVID came transition to remote and hybrid work. I think many of us appreciate the flexibility and convenience of not having to get on the road and get to work and spend 30, 40, 50 minutes a day commuting each way. I know Gen Z also share that appreciation. Having said that, during the time of transition, especially from living with a family or being on campus and starting work, it's a time of a lot of changes. They're losing their built-in support system. They're exploring their identity as a full-time professional. And their social life and social connections are shifting. So those transitions do tend to create a sense of uncertainty, anxiety, and sometimes depression. So I think it is important for us to recognize that school to work transition is an important time where whether we are someone who work with Gen Z in the workplace or have relationship with them because we're a family member or a friend, that we're mindful. How can technology help? I think there are a couple of ways. Technologies that have proven to be beneficial are truly the ones that foster relationship and connections. While there are certainly things that we need to be aware of and be cautious, and I appreciate the conversation about importance of helping Gen Zs develop a sense of agency in terms of their relationship and how they're using technology. Technology also has power and potential to create connections. And we're seeing this in workplaces. Some workplaces are using technology to foster communication, feedback on performance, and relationship with one another and with their supervisor. So I believe there is opportunity for us to also harness the power of technology for connections.
I love this talk about opportunity, and I don't want to be a cynic and definitely want to get to that. But let's talk a little bit about the negatives that I think have come up on all of your answers. I mean, we hear study after study about tech hurting young people's relationships, their self-esteem. I know there was research on particularly Instagram, if you're looking at young teenagers and how that affects their self-image. And Dr. Rich in particular, I'm curious, like in your opinion, what are the major points of concern? And I think you mentioned this a little bit in your earlier answer, but are those concerns overblown, particularly among parents and families?
I think the biggest concern is it's very easy to point at tech as the problem. And tech is neutral. Tech is a tool. And just like a shovel, you can either bash someone over the head with it or plant a field. I think it's how we behave with it, how we interact with each other that makes the difference. We are humans, we are flawed, and there are built-in algorithms that appeal to our lowest denominator in many ways, in the sense that in order to be heard, one has to be edgier than the next thing or whatever. And so it encourages people both to feel anonymous so they can get away with stuff, but also to kind of be edgy to get the attention they want and need. And one of the reasons that as a pediatrician who cares for these kids, it bothers me to blame tech is not to defend tech so much as it takes the onus off of the behavior and says, the smartphone did it to me, or social media made me do it, rather than it's me, and for that very reason, I mean, we have a clinic, the Clinic for Interactive Media and Internet Disorders, which, as you might imagine, is swamped with kids right now who have gone down the rabbit hole of online gaming or social media, pornography, or what we call information binging, which is like endless Wiki or YouTube or Reddit or Quora, but what we're seeing is that people are coming in and saying, I think my kid is addicted, or the kid is saying, I think I'm addicted. And this really isn't a good analogy to call it an addiction. If you think about addictions as using a substance that is pleasurable but not necessary for life, that then you use in greater and greater amounts despite negative consequences, and our therapeutic goal is abstinence. First of all, they can't abstain from interactive media and function in this world now. And so we see this as more akin to binge eating disorder, which is we've yet to see a kid who didn't have an underlying issue with ADHD or anxieties of various kinds, mood disorders. They go to this space and get in trouble to comfort themselves, to distract themselves, to feel better. And when we can identify that underlying driver of these behaviors, usually the kids pull out of it pretty easily and pretty well, because they too feel trapped in something that is negative for them.
So just to clarify, you're saying that some of these kids and some of the people that you're working with, their mental health concerns exist outside of the actual technology and might be amplified in this space?
Yes, and it may have existed and not been noticed, particularly kids with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. They're often very, very good at compensating until the demand ramps up beyond their ability to compensate. So it's not just the 4-year-olds bouncing off the walls that have ADHD. Kids are getting diagnosed all the way through into actually the workplace when the demands on them outstrip their ability to compensate. And when we can treat them, these kids don't need to go down the rabbit hole to feel better about themselves. They're able to develop better coping strategies and to feel more successful, particularly the kids with ADHD in school.
Interesting. Anything to add over here?
Yeah, I'd love to add to the fact that I think it's so important for us to recognize that in some ways, adolescents and young adults are turning to tech as a way to cope or self-soothe or regulate their difficult feelings. And it's important to really recognize what are sources of anxiety and depression that preceded their usage of technology. I think there are two things that come to my mind when I think about impact of technology or excessive and perhaps unhealthy use of social media in particular, is how they influence youth and young adults' development of self-concept and self-worth, and their relationship and their ability to connect with others. So social media is great, and it does appeal to our natural instinct to relate and to connect. That's who we are. So it's natural, especially for young adolescents and young adults who are really reorienting themselves to their peers, away from their family. It's so natural for social media to be appealing. And why And social media does provide opportunity for connections beyond the geographic confines of their school or their communities. It does have power to connect them with people around the globe who might share their interest, who might provide an inspiration. But at the same time, there is the social referencing that inevitably happens in social media. So how do we, whether we are parent or teacher or managers that are working with Gen Zs, help to foster a sense of self-worth, a sense of value as an individual that inevitably will incorporate their relationship and how they see themselves in relation to others, but it's really grounded in their sense of strength, I think is really important. Secondly, the social media does take away, or excessive use does take away time and opportunity for adolescents and young adults to spend time and build meaningful connections one-on-one. I think we sadly see statistics that show that Gen Z may be the loneliest generation of all times, despite the fact that they may have hundreds or even thousands of online friends. So how are we creating opportunities for Gen Z to build meaningful relationship? By definition, meaningful relationship are those they could call during a time of trouble and need. So I think those are a couple of things that we need to continue to think about.
Yeah, and I think, what I'm seeing in this conversation is these big words, phones, social media, this whole idea of like big tech and how a lot of times it's framed as the enemy, even though it's not. And, I'm curious, Mr. London, you also run a tech company, a different kind, and what are you seeing as the benefits of technology when we're coming to this conversation about mental health?
Sure. So, I see the benefits as significant. Specifically, the first thing we can look at would just be accessibility. The idea that a person is far more easily able to find a therapist, as an example. And, that person may have been an individual who would not have gotten therapy before when technology wasn't available to them. So I think that is a first step. It can't be bad to give someone therapy, I think. And so therefore, we're doing a lot of good with tech in that manner. Specifically, think of the options that people had to pay for therapy and how it's evolved. So initially, it was healthcare. It's always been healthcare. It's still healthcare, and that has pros and cons, obviously. And then then we turn to what I'd call the high-paid therapist in the local area. That also has pros and cons, in my opinion. Well, now people are able to put in their preferences, and people are able to get a therapist that would meet their needs and preferences again, and from there, they're actually able to have therapy via, from their home via video or chat or message or whatever modality made the most sense for that individual. We're doing a lot of good with technology, just being able to do that in itself. And then again, more on the payers. We now have, because of technology, you now have middle schools and high schools and colleges who are actually paying for those students to have therapy. You have employers who are looking especially at the early career individuals, and they're willing to pay for those people to get therapy. They want things that go beyond the traditional ways that people have availed themselves of the help that they need, because they recognize the benefits for both the individual and the entity, but also because it's the right thing to do, right? So technology is allowing for all that to happen, and so generally, I'm bullish on technology and therapy and all it's doing today.
I'm curious too, is this generation also predisposed to be more open to that? We were talking about how this is a group of people who grew up with phones in their hands.
They're way more open. I think they're significantly more open, and also some of the things that they feel are different. So when I need to talk to the doctor and I almost understand, I'm gonna have to wait on the phone. I'm gonna have to get transferred. I hope I'm there when I get my call back. They don't get that. And by the way, I like the way they think. I think they're correct, actually. They are used to immediacy. They're used to fewer obstacles for them to achieve what it is that they want, both in therapy and in other parts of their lives, right? They do Uber Eats. So, we're talking about a a group that is used to doing things in this manner, and that's going to perpetuate more therapy, which I think is good, because hopefully they will be less likely to have more serious issues. And I think also they'll talk about it more, which is something else about this generation that we're here to discuss today. And because of that, the stigma associated with it will be further reduced. So there's a virtuous circle going on, which is pretty awesome.
Yeah, I see you nodding. Yeah.
Thank you for saying that, Michael. I think it's so important. I appreciate Gen Z because they are committed to mental health and wellness in a way that those of us who are slightly older may not have been. I think they're more informed, they're more aware, and they're more willing to advocate for wellness and mental health, whether it's in school or whether it's in workplace. In fact, one of the the employment benefit that Gen Z professionals look for is mental health coverage. That comes on the top of their list when they're choosing where they want to work.
Interesting.
Because mental health is so important. So I think we potentially are beneficiary of Gen Z's commitment and willingness to advocate for mental health. And I appreciate the fact that in addition to increasing the tech, increasing access to therapeutic treatment and clinicians, there's a ways in which technology can improve the quality and efficacy of treatment by understanding what happens, what is working in therapy, what is not.
Yeah.
Those are information we didn't previously have. We also have an opportunity for technology to provide support between sessions, which didn't really exist before. So I think it's important for us to recognize that there are possibilities and potential for technology to contribute to improving mental health.
Interesting.
Can I give a little counterpoint here?
Of course.
One of the things that we noticed at CIMAID, the Clinic for Interactive Media and Internet Disorders, is that before the lockdown, we saw these kids in clinic only, and the parents would usually wuss out and wait until the night before, the morning of, and say, we're going to take you to Boston Children's and they're going to take away your video games, or something to that effect. And the kid would say, no way, I'm not going. Our no-show rate on first visits was 30% until the pandemic happened, and it went to 0 when we went all virtual.
Oh, wow.
And we've kept it mostly virtual because they feel comfortable in that environment. They know I can't reach into the monitor and yank them into the hospital or take something away from them. And that allows us to build the therapeutic rapport going forward. One of the things I worry about in counterpoint to online therapy is that there are a lot of self-appointed therapists out there. So there are a lot of influencers who think of themselves as therapists, and kids don't have necessarily the ability to figure out what's real and what's not. I worry about the issue of safety in that case, because trained therapists know when someone is suicidal or homicidal or really on the edge of a break of some sort. And it's much, much harder to do that online. One of the things that I noticed when I went from all in person to all online is I was shattered at the end of a session. And I was saying, why am I so tired when I'm doing the same thing as I did before? And it's because when you're in the same space with someone, you're getting a whole lot more information than you get on a screen. You get the vibe, you see the rest of their body language. You kind of sense them in ways that are beyond what you can see on a screen or hear. And so I think it's hard on the therapists. It's hard work, and in fact harder. It is more accessible to kids, but do kids have the wherewithal to really figure out who's good and who's not? And how do we, in this remote situation, figure out who needs to go to a higher level of care and how do we get to them? Because they will often disclose some really horrifying or upsetting stuff, and you're, possibly 1,000 miles away from them.
That's a really good lead into one of our audience questions, a little bit about how young people are communicating in the world today and what works for them and what doesn't. It says, this questioner believes students, and I would also expand that to young people in the workforce post-COVID, are less able to communicate with each other in person. Is this just because of the pandemic, or will this be the new normal? Which is really the question of our time. So,
That's a great question. Thank you. As I was preparing for this panel, I was doing some reading and research, and actually interpersonal and communication skill rose to the top, or was identified as one of the biggest challenge for Gen Z in the workplace. Employers and managers are saying it's difficult to communicate with some of the Gen Zs. Again, we have to be careful that we don't stereotype the entire generation. But I think it is true. So as to how has this happened, pandemic no doubt had an impact. I think we cannot underestimate the impact of COVID. What did the isolation, social isolation, being removed physically from their peers and opportunity to develop psychosocially and communication skills and emotional intelligence, what is the impact on young people as they transition into workplace? I think it's something that we will continue to think about and will learn. I think we all bear a responsibility to support Gen Z students and professionals to gain some of those skills. They may have missed the opportunity. Obviously, COVID happened. They didn't choose COVID to happen. They didn't remove themselves from their peers or relationships. So I think it's important for us to identify what are the specific skills that are important to succeed and thrive in workplace. Ability to communicate clearly, ability to receive feedback and learn to use them to improve, ability to be empathetic and take someone else's perspective. I think those are some of the skills that I think are going to be important for us as we think about social media, technology, and interpersonal skills.
yeah,
Can I give a word of defense to Gen Z?
please.
People say
We would appreciate
they're
it.
hard to communicate with. We have to remember that communication is a two-way street. And we have to meet them where they are. We can't demand that they go to the old style that we're used to. And in fact, I don't even talk about the new normal. I talk about the next normal, because today's new normal is going to be old in about 6 weeks, if not sooner. And so I think we have to have a level of flexibility and resilience and nimbleness to meet them where they are, to hear what they're saying and what they're thinking and how they're hurting, rather than expect them to step up and fit into the expectations that we have for them.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, I appreciate that point very much, because Gen Z are a product of our time. They have come
And
to
they're people.
age. Exactly.
They're people.
As all of us have been influenced by
Yeah.
all that has happened in the last number of years. So you're right. I think we are entering a new era. What does it mean to communicate effectively, work alongside, and to support one another, whether it's in school setting or in work setting or at home?
I really love this idea of the next normal, because I feel like we're even sitting in a panel where half of our audience, if not more, is virtual. I'm thinking
Right.
about hybrid work weeks, more remote classes and clubs, how kids are approaching school. Like, we really are in a different time.
Yeah.
And, that kind of leads me to our last question that I want us to touch on, which is that tech, and particularly social media, is not going anywhere. So with the work that you guys are doing, what do you think people should be thinking about moving forward? Both the actual young people who are in this position and the people they interact with both at home and at work. It's a big question.
I'll start, I guess. Look at me. I will confess to being a pediatrician is an occupational hazard of optimism, and I think that the Gen Z kids are going to make this world a better place, because God knows we're not handing them a very good one, either psychosocially or climate change or any of that stuff. They have reason to be concerned and anxious, and frankly a little bit angry at us, or maybe a lot bit angry at us, for the world we're handling them. But that being said, I think that if we can learn to use, in particular, social media, since that's what you're asking about, if we can use it not in ways that we're marketing ourselves or showing off to each other, but in the ways that are truly authentic, in the sense that we should be talking about our fears. We should be talking about our limitations. Because if you think about it, the best relationships we all have in life are with people who know our limitations and love us anyway. Not despite them, but in some ways because of them. Because that's how humans complement each other, how they compensate for each other's shortcomings. And so I have this optimistic fantasy that if we can use social media in ways that are authentic and true, that it can be an instrument of peace. Think about if a kid in the Ukraine and a kid in Russia are online with each other and their respective leaders say, go after the other one. They say, screw you. I know this kid better than I know you. Why should I? And I think that we can actually build the global village that Marshall McLuhan spoke of. But now that global village is having to raise the child. So to steal, from both an African proverb and from Marshall McLuhan, I think the global village is now raising the child. And we have a responsibility to take care of that ecosystem and make it more human.
Great question, and something that I think all of us are thinking about is, how can we leverage the power of technology?
Yeah.
I think it's important for all of us that we all of us probably have at least one person in our life who is a Gen Z, whether they're a child, a friend, a colleague, maybe someone we mentor. Gen Z desire connections. They want to do meaningful work. They want to feel good about themselves and know that what they're doing, whether what they're studying, what they're doing at work, is worthwhile and impactful. I think those hopes and dreams are shared universally. I think Gen Zs have a voice and power to really speak to those needs in a way that is unprecedented. So I admire Gen Z, and they are actually going to really, are already shaping our future. We're having this conversation, yet right across the street, we're seeing the Gen Zs walking by. And they will be leading us into the future. So I come back to helping Gen Zs develop a sense of what is important for them, sense of identity, sense of value, and sense of impact. Those are things that motivate, inspire Gen Zs. And I do think that technology can help by making opportunity to identify their interest more readily available. Technology has enabled opportunity to learn skills outside of school and work that didn't exist 10 years ago, or maybe a little more than 10 years ago, and make connection with people who share their interests and commitment. I think those are all the ways that technology can help. I would like to say that I think one thing that I hope all of us, and including myself, could do is have communication with Gen Zs who we care about impact of social media and technology on them. Actually, the research shows that when we actually create an opportunity for Gen Z themselves to reflect upon impact of social media or excessive use of social media, they're able to recognize that the impact is not what they want. And when there is an opportunity to reflect, they're better able to self-monitor and able to develop a different relationship and a way they engage with technology. It's not easy. It's not easy for any one of us.
Yeah.
But I do think starting those conversations early, whether it is between parent and child, or teacher and student, or manager and worker, I think it's really important for us to continue to have those conversations in a way that is empathetic and compassionate.
Michael, we are reaching the end of our time, so why don't you finish it off?
30 seconds. Use technology to make sure your therapist is properly licensed. Use technology to make sure that your therapist is somebody that you're comfortable with. If I want a black male therapist, I should have a black male therapist. That's how this works. And finally, I think you should use technology to be able to change your therapist if it's not the right fit, which is very difficult to do traditionally. But using tech allows an individual to have, in my opinion, the best chance of getting the help that that person needs.
We'll
thank
have to have
you.
Yelp for therapists.
Why not?
Right.
Well, thank you folks for such an interesting conversation. This was Gen Z mental health and tech's impact. There's a bunch of great sessions ahead today and tomorrow, and you can see the entire schedule at globe.com/summit. And all the sessions are also available for viewing after if you want to hear all the lovely things these people said all over again. Thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Thank you.